The next fly I've got in this series of streamer flies that I'm doing is a Carrie Stevens pattern called the Don's Delight. It's a very, very basic baitfish pattern. Has all the classical characteristics of Carrie Stevens patterns and how she put these together. And it's very, very simple. It's a tinsel body, tail, tag, white hackles. It does have a Ring Neck Pheasant shoulder on it and a little false hackle, but there's no belly on this or underwing or anything like that. So it's very, very basic, and I personally like just basic plain white baitfish patterns with a little bit of color to them. I just think they represent well and they fish very well. So that's the Don's Delight, and we'll go ahead and get started tying. So we'll start our fly with putting a hook in the vise. This is a Mustad R79 hook. The old model number was a 94720. This is in a size 6. It is a 9x long streamer hook, and typically the Carrie Stevens streamer patterns were on very, very long shank streamer hooks. You could use something a little bit shorter, like an L87, something like that. That would be, say, a 5 or 6x long streamer hook, but typically these patterns were on much, much longer shanked hooks. Because the body of this is a Mylar tinsel, I'm using a size 12 gold and silver Mylar tinsel for the body on this. I don't have to worry about thread, a base layer of thread here bleeding through any floss or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and use a black floss right now just to cover up the hook shank and get my tag and tail tied in. This is a black flat wax nylon. It is a larger thread, and it is simply so that I can get from one end of the hook shank to the other a little bit quicker. You do want to try and keep these in touching turns so that we still try to keep as smooth a underbody as possible on our flies. Now for the tag on this, I'm actually using a size 14 Mylar tinsel, gold and silver, just like the body, but the tag is a little bit narrower. At least the Mylar that I use is a little narrower so that it has more wraps in it. I'm going to tie this in with the gold side out. That way it will flip over to the silver side when we put that tag in. I'll pull that back and just have a little bit sticking out. And I'm going to put in 3 or 4 wraps, getting to just about the point of the hook, just shy of the point of the hook. I'll turn this over and put in my tag. I'm going to put in about anywhere from 7 to 8 wraps. That gets me right at the end of the shank, and then I'm going to put the same number of wraps back in as I get to my thread. Once I get up to the thread, I'll just go ahead and tie this off. I like to tie it off so that the tag or the butt end of this is on the lower side here, because then if I have a tail, especially like if I were to have some sort of a hackle tail or something up here, that little nub right there wouldn't be getting in the way of the tail on the upper side here. And this fly does have a tail. We're going to be using some red hackle fibers for this, so I'm actually just taking a hackle. This is a rooster saddle hackle, American Whiting American, and I'm just going to take some of these longer barbs from the bottom of that feather and stroke these out so they're about 90 degrees so that the tips are evened up right here. collect those together, pull those off. I'm going to trim these curlies right here off just a little bit of an angle so that it just smooths that body out just a little bit more. And then I'm going to tie these in. I usually like to have my tail somewhere around half, maybe a little more than a third, but about half a shank length long. I'll get a couple of wraps on that to lash that down, and then I'm going to bring my thread forward. I don't want to put too many wraps back here and bulk that up. I am going to flatten my thread out this time so that as I'm wrapping this body in, I should say this underbody, it will be as smooth as I can get it. And I'm just going to work my way up to the eye of the hook, or I should say at the end of the head space, so that we can tie in the tinsel, and then it'll be a double layer tinsel body of silver tinsel. So again, the body on this is a gold and silver size 12 Mylar tinsel. I'm going to tie this in with the gold side up. I want to trim the end of this just to a little bit of a point like this, and I'm going to tie that in on my side right here just with that point going up into the head space a little bit. And I'm just going to put 2 or 3 wraps on that. Again, you want to minimize how many wraps you're putting in so you don't end up making too much of a bump in there. You could, if you want to, put some super glue or some head cement along the shank here to just help reinforce the body a little bit. I am not going to. I'm going to flip over my tinsel over to the silver side as I start to wrap down the length of the shank. I want these in touching turns. If anything, I want just a little bit of a gap. What I don't want is overlapping, because that overlap of each turn will transfer into the next layer. One thing you have to be careful of with this Mylar tinsel is, especially when you get up to the end here and you're a little short like this, be very careful that you do not lose this tag end of that tinsel in the tying process, because if you do, it will come unraveled all the way back down, almost all the way back up to your tie-in spot. Another reason some people will put some Zap-A-Gap or CA glue or something along the hook shank as they're doing this, just in case. So I'll put in 2-3 wraps to hold that in and inspect it. I don't have any huge gaps. You can sometimes massage the tinsel just a little bit if you have a little bit of gap here or there. I'll bring my thread forward towards the eye of the hook, and at this point I'm going to change over to my finishing thread, which is a black 6/0 Danville. So I'm going to tidy up the headspace here so that we can get our throat in and our wing. And this will be just a little bit neater. Typical Carrie Stevens flies had a little bit longer head to them, especially when she had those that she added in a red stripe in the head, such as the Dawn's Delight here, which we're going to do. So this is one fly. If you want, you can make that head maybe about 1.5 to 2 times the length of the eye of the hook. And now we will go ahead and tie in our throat and our wing to finish the Dawn's Delight. The throat on our fly is just some white hackle fibers. I'm going to be using some white schlappen. If all you have is just some saddle hackle or something, that would work as well. Schlappen typically is a much softer barb, and therefore for these long streamers makes a little bit longer and a throat that flows a little bit more. So I've already gone ahead and prepped the schlappen. I'll hold it up here on the underside so that the throat goes about halfway down the shank. I'll pinch and roll my fingers forward, bring my thread straight up, 3 or 4 wraps, tie in the throat. I'll inspect it. Looks good, so we'll go ahead and clip off the excess. I'm going to go ahead and wrap that forward just to clean that up a little bit. You always want to be careful that when you're tying these kinds of flies that you keep that headspace nice and neat and especially level so that when you're tying in materials they won't kind of go cockeyed at different angles for you. Now the wing on this is comprised of just white hackles with a shoulder of Ring Neck Pheasant Tippet and a cheek of jungle cock. I've gone ahead and prepped my wing already. As you can see, I have 2 white saddle hackles. These are just American whiting American capes. There's 2 hackles there for my left side, 2 hackles for my right side. I've got a shoulder of ring-necked pheasant in there as well as a jungle cock, and all of these are all glued together right here at this point. It makes it much easier to attach and tie in these wings when you have all of these more or less assembled ahead of time and glued together. A lot of times if you try to put your hackles in, they'll roll on you or they'll split, they'll kind of get cockeyed a little bit, and then you try to add your shoulders and your cheek on there and it can further exacerbate it. So I'm going to go ahead and trim off these butt ends here. I left these in just as I am gluing those together. They give you a nice little handle. I'm going to trim those off, and then we'll measure this to make certain it's the right length. I generally glue these together a little bit long and measure during the process so that once the cheeks and the shoulders are on, everything is just the length that I want it. When I tie this in, this should extend, the tail should extend maybe 1/4 of a shank length beyond the bend. I do want to have a little bit of the bottom side of these wings actually over the body, if I tie it in like this so that all of that wing is above the body, you'll see the wing sticks out at an abrupt angle. What I'm looking for is more for the wing to lay down along the back and go along the sides. So I split up that wing, bring it down on both sides so that the wing itself is sandwiching on both sides of the hook, and then this portion of the wing right here just lays nice and flat along the back. So once that's in position, I'll bring my thread up. I'll get about 5 or 6 turns in there to bind that down and see how it looks. I have a little bit of curve in here, but that is mostly due to the hackles that were used here more than anything else. And that's fine. Generally, if it's a fishing fly, you're not going to worry about that. If this were something that I were framing as a gift or for something special, I would take more care to get these hackles all the same shape, profile, the same curve, so that the curves cancel each other out and it's much straighter. But in regards to fishing this, I think this will do, with the exception, for some reason, both my wings ended up on one side of the body. So things like that happen. Just take your time with it. Get both those wings on the opposite sides of the body, like that. Bring the start of that wing right down the head space there. And we'll try it again. Sometimes these wings take a little bit of finessing to get them to do exactly what you want them to do. Some people will also steam these. A lot of times if you steam them, the wings will be a little bit fuller. I see the problem here. This particular part of my wing has a rather sparse bottom section right here to it. So it's not exactly laying up there nice and even. We'll go ahead and just try and lash that down a little bit on that side, and then I'll put this one in on this side. Let's see if that works a little bit better for me, and I think that did. That curve is there. We go. Just getting to me a little bit there. Okay, so there we go. So now the wing, as you can see, is much more lateral. I've got some of the fibers coming down on both sides, especially my shoulders are coming down on both sides here. Keep in mind, when you are fishing this particular fly, after a few casts, it's not going to be looking all this great, and after a few fish, it's not even closely going to be looking this great, and that's fine. Trim away the excess, and we'll start to shape the head of the fly. Try not to bulk these up too much. It can be very easy to do. You want to go ahead and get everything covered up, and because we are going to put a red stripe in this, so just take your time, put enough thread wraps in here to get that covered up, go ahead and flatten out our thread. Get our whip finish tool out. Flattening out the thread at this stage when you're doing the whip finish actually helps a great deal. This particular fly we're not going to be putting a black lacquer on because of the fact that we've got a red stripe we're putting in here. So I want to try and have all this as smooth as possible. So when we're putting on clear lacquer or hard as hull, which is what I prefer, then it looks much smoother. Less coat you have to put on to get it all nice and smoothed out. Here we go. The curve in that wing is wanting to pull this part of the tail off to the side. So for the red band, I'm going to use a red 6.0 Danville. And just take your time with this. You're going to want to attach that right in the middle of the head, right here. I like to put in about 5 wraps to get that nice and secured. Cut that tag end close. And just be careful that you're putting those wraps all in the same spot. It's easy to make that band extra wide. And always remember that you're going to be putting in another 4 or 5 wraps as a whip finish on this. So leave those off until you do your whip finish. Otherwise you might end up with that red band being a little bit bulkier than you want it to be. So take your time with this. So I don't have a little pigtail of thread. I'm going to use the flat part of my scissors here right up against that head to cut the thread off, and I have a nice smooth band all around there. At this stage my fly is almost done. I'm going to go ahead and put some hard as hull on here. That will soak down into those threads, and it will make that whole head very, very solid. And as soon as that is dry, in a few minutes, we will start putting some hard as hull on there as a finish. Get 3 or 4 coats of hard as hull on there, and our Don's Delight will be finished. So the fly tight's all set up on the head of the fly, our initial head cement. And now we're going to start the process of putting a clear coat on here. Again, I can't use a black lacquer as a finish coat on this because of the red band. So I'm just using some hard as hull, and I will place probably about 3 coats on this, maybe 4. Each coat will go on here, and as it cures, it shrinks down, and those thread wraps will all kind of start popping a little bit. You'll see them. So you put 3 or 4 coats on here just to level all that out and make it look nice and smooth. Generally between each coat, or I should say when you put each coat on here, it will actually look like it's finished because you have enough head cement on here. It levels out and it looks nice and smooth. So this will give you an idea of what it will look like when the head of that fly is done. But I'll have probably another two, maybe even 3 coats to put on here. It just depends. And you don't have to do this. It's not a requirement for these flies. I just think it looks a little bit nicer. It certainly makes it a little more durable. And these are classic patterns. They're a lot of fun to tie, and taking that extra step just to make them look a little bit nicer, I think kind of what it's all about. So that's the Don's Delight. As I mentioned, it is a very, very basic Carrie Stevens style pattern. Has all the characteristics of her patterns in terms of how the tags put in, tail, throat, wings are constructed. So it's a great pattern if you're wanting to get into this kind of fly and this style of fly tying. Doesn't take any real expensive materials or anything like that, or anything hard to get. Don's Delight. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and not only learned a new pattern, but maybe learned some new techniques and a few new skills. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button below. You can support Dressed Irons by hitting the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos are published. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.